Hello lovely people, my name is Emma and today I am bringing you a brand new original tag. So this is the Omnivore Reader Book Tag, and this is basically for people like myself who read from a huge variety of different genres. It's no secret on my channel that I do like to bounce around with my genres. There's probably no genre that I read literally none of. There are some that I have more of than others, but I definitely read from a huge range, as you'll see if you look back at any of my like recommendations videos or general monthly wrap-ups. And I know that there are other readers out there like me who really find it difficult to stick to one genre. So the term omnivore reader was one that I heard Mara from Books Like Woe describe herself as, and I think it's a really fitting way of describing how I approach my reading. And I wanted to do a tag which gave an opportunity for people to talk about quite a wide range of disparate genres, and that was very like self-guided based on your own reading, but also as an opportunity of like highlighting the different things that you read and just kind of talking about genres in general. So for this one, what you need to do is you need to pick 4 entirely distinct genres or subgenres that you personally like to read a lot of, and to really try and make them as different as you possibly can. And then what you're going to do is you're just going to talk about your favorite book from that genre, a book that you're either currently reading or most recently read from that genre, and then a book that's on your TBR that fits within that genre that you're quite excited about. So I'm going to do this one today, and the nice thing about this is you can totally repeat it with more than with different genres each time round. But for today I'm going to be talking about contemporary romance, historical fiction, thrillers, and political non-fiction. So with that in mind, we're going to jump in and talk about the first category. The first one is contemporary romance for me, and one of my favourite books within contemporary romance is Boyfriend Material by Alexis. I started reading contemporary romance this year, and this one has really stood out to me as being just so much fun. I love the tropes of contemporary romance, and this one follows a fake dating trope, and it's about our main protagonist who is the son of a celebrity, of like a famous celebrity, who has kind of been gone through sort of the tabloids as like being a bit of a burnout, often being like drunk and disorderly, and basically his job has told him that he needs to clean up his image as sort of the face of this charity. So he needs to find himself a clean-cut boyfriend so that way the current like benefit they've got coming up, he doesn't scare off potential donors. So he manages to convince a very straight-laced fella that he knows through a friend of a friend to pretend to be his boyfriend for a while, and it's about their relationship growing and developing, and it was just really, really lovely. Like, I don't often like the fake dating trope. I think it's done quite badly normally, but this one I really appreciated, and I love the like opposites attract dynamic of their relationship. And it was a really interesting look at kind of celebrity and the way that it warps people, and also sort of implicit homophobia and how that can impact people as well. So a really, really wonderful read. The contemporary romance that I've most recently finished, because I have DNF'd a few recently, so the most recently finished one is A Princess in Theory by Alyssa. So this is a story about a woman who strikes up a relationship with a guy, not realising that he's actually the prince of an African country, and she was actually his betrothed when they were children, and then she kind of got spirited away, and it's about trying to bring her back to meet her family. I had a good time with it. Like Alyssa, I've read some of her other work that I've really enjoyed, but what I didn't like about this one was it was kind of doing like the prince and I sort of assumed identity idea, but the whole kind of premise of the relationship being based on a lie, and like not just a lie about his identity, which I'm kind of behind, like I don't mind those ones, but also about her identity was the bit that was really problematic. Like he didn't tell her for a very long time about her history, and actually in that she's got family members who she doesn't know exist, and there's like a whole part of her heritage that she's no idea about. So it's one thing to lie about his identity, but to lie about hers as well was one that I didn't really like. I did enjoy some of the scenes. Both of the characters I thought were very interesting, and I really liked her as like a main woman lead because she was in STEM as well, which was really cool. Just sort of the work that she did was really interesting, and it did touch on kind of like the sort of implicit sexism within STEM, which was very, very interesting. But generally I thought the premise that the relationship was set up on was not great, but I am interested in more books within the series because I know that Alyssa is a great writer in general. This one just didn't really hit the mark for me. And then one that's on my TBR other than the Alyssa that I'm quite interested in is One to Watch by Kate Stayman London. So this one is about a plus size woman who basically criticises a dating agency, or like a dating show, kind of reality TV show, for not portraying more people with like a wider variety of body types, and then she gets an opportunity to be the main star within this show to try and find her true love. I've heard very positive things about it. Generally it's been well received and it does look quite entertaining, so at some point I'm going to jump in with that one. The next genre that I wanted to talk about is historical fiction, and for that my favourite is, favourite is hard because I have many, but the one that I enjoyed most recently that I really loved was Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This has turned into a bit of a booktube darling, and for me personally I think it's well deserved. It's a historical fiction that is set in Mexico in the 1950s. Sorry, she has another book that I think is set in the 1920s and I get them confused. It's about a young fabulous woman who receives a weird letter from her cousin who's just married into this fairly mysterious family, basically saying that they're poisoning her and can she come and save them. And then it kind of sort of falls into the classic thing that like Gothic historical fiction does, where there's sort of this element of kind of magic-y stuff going on. There's a little bit that like blurring the lines between sort of reality and fantasy. It gets a little bit fever dreamy in places, and just generally I had a really good time with it. It does a bit of a weird exposition dump about 2/3 of the way through that I didn't think was very necessary, but other than that I love the setting, I love the characters, and I just generally had a really good time. I thought it was very atmospheric, and it kind of ticked all the boxes of what I'm personally looking for in a historical fiction, which often involves the odd bit of like magical breaking the barriers between the realms kind of an element to it. I don't like my historical fiction to be too straight historical, if that makes sense. So really enjoyed it. One that I finished most recently is Everfair by Nisi Shull. So this is kind of a steampunk what if speculative fiction as much as it is a historical fiction, and it is set in the 1900s in the Democratic Republic of Congo. It is about the invasion of the Congo by Belgium, but instead what it is a bit of a twist, as if the Congo had access to various steampunk technologies, which means that they remained an independent state, and how that impacted various events that happened within the kind of turn of the century. It's a fairly impressive undertaking with a huge cast of characters spanning a good like 30 odd years, maybe even a bit longer, which means that you don't really get an opportunity to fully like connect with many of the characters. But in terms of like as an impressive sort of rewriting of history and kind of as this sort of sprawling epic, it does a very good job with what Nisi Shull is kind of working with here, and I definitely enjoy some of the steampunk elements. I love the way that they kind of impacted and changed things, and I love the different introductions of what steampunk kind of means. I haven't read much steampunk based stuff, so this was a really fun twist on a kind of a more classic historical fiction format. And then one that is on my TBR that I'm quite keen on is The Huntress by Kate Quinn. I have this both on ebook and audiobook, so I'm probably going to pick up the audiobook. This is a World War II historical fiction, which is one of my favourite time periods to read about. I know it's been a bit overdone in fiction, but I do love me a good World War II, especially when it's based on spies, and this one is. It's about an infamous Nazi killer who hunted Nazis kind of behind enemy lines, and then it's about two different people in modern day trying to find out about this woman and trying to basically discover her identity. I do also quite enjoy it when there is a historical component and then a modern day component finding out about the history kind of running alongside, so I think this is going to tick a lot of my boxes for me. And Kate Quinn has another one called The Alice Network, which is also about spies, that I also have, that at some point I will also read. The next one I'm going to talk about is thrillers, and for me one of my favourite thrillers that nobody ever seems to talk about is The 50/50 Killer by Steve Mosby. This is more of like a procedural kind of thriller, and it's following a detective who is tracking this killer who takes couples and then will kill one of them but not the other, and it's about him setting them up so that they kind of have to pick who is the one who ends up being murdered within it. This is the kind of book that has so many twists and manages to keep you guessing even to the very end, and I love the whole dynamic of like, what are you willing to put yourself through for your loved one, and like how strong is your relationship when it's really like tested. Plus it hits some of the real classic like disgruntled detective, failing marriage, sort of probably a problem with alcohol kind of a vibe that you often get with procedurals, so I think it's a really great one. I don't often read many thrillers, which means the one that I finished most recently that wasn't like a kind of classic crime sort of book like a Raymond Chandler or an Agatha Christie, which I'm not including within this because I think they're a whole separate subgenre in their own right, is 6-4 by Hideo Yokoyama. This is a translated fiction from Japan, and it's like a really iconic Japanese crime, and it is about, it's kind of interesting because I would class this as a thriller, but it's a very slow paced character driven thriller. It's sort of got three different threads going along. There's a missing girl, there's a case of missing girls in the past where there was something kind of potentially nefarious and kind of hidden up, maybe a conspiracy with the police, and then there's a whole conversation going on about the police and the media and their relationships. There's loads of different characters, and like I said, it's really slow paced. It's an absolute beast of a book, and it doesn't have any like like really big dramatic kind of shootout sort of moments. It's more about quietly discovering things, and it was really interesting, the conversation of like police cover-ups and sort of corruption within the police and the different forms that that can take. So it's a very different style to a lot of the sort of thrillers that we have that are very popular over here in like the UK and the US, but it was definitely a really interesting read, and I'd love to read more Japanese crime in the future. And then one that's on my TBR that I really want to get to at some point soon, and I definitely know that when I'm in that real thriller mood, this will definitely hit the mark, and that is Final Girls by Riley Sager. Riley Sager is definitely a bit of a booktube darling as well. Their latest book, Home After Dark, was very, very well received. This is some of their earlier work, and it is about 3 girls who have previously survived attacks from murderers, and then somebody is coming along and picking them off so that there can only be one final girl left. I love the reference to the classic horror movie final girl trope. I find horror movies and that kind of culture around horror and thriller fascinating, even if I can't watch many horror movies myself, because I really suffer with night terrors, so I have to be very careful with the content I consume and the form that that content takes. So I think this one's going to be really interesting, and it's been such a long time since I read like a real classic sort of like paperback, like supermarket thriller, if that makes sense, and I mean that in the most complimentary way possible. So I think once I am in the mood for it, this is going to go down an absolute treat, and I'm really intrigued by a lot of other work by Riley Sager. So if I like this one, I know I've got a load of that catalogue that I can check out. And it wouldn't be one of my videos if we didn't talk about at least some non-fiction. So we're going to talk about kind of political and social non-fiction here. So these are ones that are making some kind of commentary or statement about injustices within the world, which is kind of a subsection of non-fiction that I don't read incredibly often because it's very hard-hitting and difficult to read, but it is one that is really, really important to read, and is one that I'm trying to make more time for. One of my favourites in this genre is Invisible Women by Criado Perez, and this is looking at the invisible biases that are stacked against women in kind of statistics and the way that sort of we have been failed in society by how society is like structured. So it's looking at things like public transport and housing and kind of jobs, and also medicine, and how sort of medical research studies are done, and sort of this huge continuation of different ways that implicit bias gets built in, stacked in favour of men, because of the fact that often it is men who are making these decisions, and so it gets missed out just because there isn't that different perspective. Now, this has had a few criticisms in the past because it is conforming fairly heavily to a lot of different gender norms, and it does kind of involve a little bit of the erasure of various groups like the trans community. However, I still think it's a really important book, and that's because at the beginning of the book, Caroline really like lays out exactly what she's going to try to cover, and it's important to kind of in non-fiction limit the scope of what you're talking about. It is impossible to cover every particular facet of a problem, and actually, whilst there is an idealistic world where gender norms wouldn't exist, we do live in a world where the majority of people do subscribe to a binary where men do one thing and women do the other. And actually, if we can break that down within the like structure of how things are designed around us, then actually it makes it easier for women to do things, but it also makes it easier for men to do the thing that the women were doing, because if they're less likely to do it because it's actually harder than whatever the men are doing, then you see where I'm going with this. So it's about kind of bringing the reality we live in now and the reality that we want to live in sort of closer together, both on like a structural level but also on an ideological level. And in this one, Caroline's talking specifically about the structural level rather than the ideology, and I respect her for limiting that scope. It is chock full of statistics and loads of really, really important information. It will depress the heck out of you if you are a woman, because yeah, life sucks, but an important book nonetheless. One that I am currently reading at the moment is Queer Intentions by Abraham. Oh, I can't do names, I keep messing up people's surnames. It's by Amelia Abraham, not Abraham Amelia. Blair today. Blair with the words. Anyway, this is a personal journey through LGBTQ plus culture. I'm transposing everything today. This is terrible. Anyway, this is kind of a collection of not quite essays, but like each individual chapter is looking at a different facet of kind of queer community, and it's about both a mixture of sort of a memoir of some of Amelia Abraham's like experiences within this community, but also just generally looking at like what does it mean to be queer in modern day. So it's things like, you know, the popularity of RuPaul's Drag Race and how has that impacted the drag community, things like same-sex marriage and what does that mean for the concept of marriage and relationships within the queer community, the sort of decline of the gay bar, and what does that mean for sort of safe spaces, and basically when something becomes more accepted, how does that then impact the various spaces that are formed before it was that accepted. It's really fascinating. I love Amelia's writing style. She's a journalist, and you can really feel that kind of easy sort of bite-sized reading to it, and it is talking about so many different facets that, as somebody who is not part of this community, I've never really thought about how that would interact with sort of day-to-day life. And it's lovely to see where, because I've read a bit about kind of queer history, so it's really interesting to read like where has that history led to today, and how does it impact when you have a group that have been previously very marginalized becoming slightly more accepted, and what does that mean for that group. So really fascinating in general. I'm about halfway through and I'm loving it right now. And then one on my TBR that I really need to get to soon, and I did actually start for Non-Fiction November, but I was not in a frame of mind where I could take in any of it, and it was not fair on the book to do with that to it, is So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijeoma Oluo. I can't do anyone's name today. This is so bad. So this is a collection of, again, sort of independent chapters talking about what it means to be black and just sort of the conversation around race in general. Like I said, I did start it in Non-Fiction November, but I was starting a new job and my brain just could not handle most non-fiction at that moment, so I stopped reading it because I didn't think it was fair if I wasn't actually going to like actively be engaging with the content. Like, you don't want to skim read a book like this. So my intention is to pick it up probably when I finish Queer Intentions as like the next book that I read in this kind of subgenre, and I'm really looking forward to jumping back into this one. So that is it from me. I am going to tag a few people now. So I'm going to tag Kate Davis. I'm also going to tag Books Like Woe, who was very much the inspiration for this. I'm going to tag Book Olive, and I tag anyone who wants to do this. I did have more of a list of people I was going to tag. I will maybe chuck some people's like channel names down below and they can kind of consider themselves tagged. But seriously, if anybody wants to do this one, feel free to. And if you're like me and consider yourself a bit of an omnivore reader, that'd be really interesting to see how many more people like that there are out there. So that is it from me. Have a wonderful reading week, and I will chat to you soon. Bye.